So this evening we're starting a new series which we're going to be doing for the next 7 weeks. And the series is on a Buddhist ritual called the Sevenfold Puja. So there we are. We've just started the evening with a short Buddhist ritual, which we do that every time we start a class here. And what we're doing when we salute the shrine is we're saluting the Buddha, this human being that gained enlightenment, that is our ideal as a Buddhist. We're saluting the Dharma, his teaching. We're saluting the Sangha, the spiritual community of people that are practicing, and also all the enlightened beings since the Buddha. So that in itself is a ritual. And this evening we're going to be exploring another Buddhist ritual, which is puja, which literally means worship. So it's a form of worship, and it's in 7 verses. And this evening I'm going to kind of give a bit of a general introduction to puja, and then I'm going to touch on the first verse and possibly the second verse of the puja as well. And I'm going to try and make it a bit, I'm going to talk a bit, but we're also going to do some ritual, and I'm also going to ask you sort of what your experience is of ritual, or how you feel about it, or how some of it lands with you as well. Because Buddhist ritual, definitely not everybody feels the same about it as well. So I'm going to do it in quite a sort of an exploratory way. You all look a bit worried. Is that okay? Okay, that's better. There we are. There's nothing to worry about. So I'm not going to lock the door and sort of do some really heavy ritual or anything like that. Okay, so I'm going to just say a little bit about puja and ritual, and then we're going to do a period of meditation, and I'm going to bring a part of the puja into the meditation as well, and then we'll talk about that a little bit. But I just wanted to say something generally and sort of give us a little bit of context. The first thing that I'm interested in is who here has done some Buddhist ritual before? Okay, so most of you have, yeah. Who's completely new, who hasn't done anything like that before? So quite a few of you, yeah, great. Okay, that's whichever it is, that's totally fine. What we're going to do with this series is we thought it's an opportunity partly to do some ritual, but also partly just to explore it a little bit, because it's an integral part of most traditions of Buddhism have some element of ritual. Some of them are very strong on ritual. So, for example, if you study Zen, there'll be a lot of chanting, a lot of ritual, a lot of kind of ritualized objects and chanting and reading and that sort of thing. And in Triratna, ritual is very much part of our culture. It's an integral part of our practice. But people have very different responses to puja. And I'm going to look at why, what some of the reasons for that might be this evening. And on the team, we thought it would be interesting just to do a series on puja so that we could do a little bit of ritual at the class, but also talk about it and help people to sort of explore their relationship to ritual, maybe deepen their relationship with ritual a little bit. So that's what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. So when I first came to Buddhist ritual, it was pretty much the first thing that I did. So I first came along to a Buddhist center in 1997, and I came along for the simple reason that a friend said, "Look, I'm doing this meditation course. Do you want to come with me?" And I said, "Yeah, all right then." And here I am, however many years later. So I always say, be careful. You don't know what you're getting yourselves into. But I went along for this meditation course, and it was on a weekday evening, and they said, "Oh, well, we're going to have a festival day on the Sunday, which was Sangha Day, where we're sort of marking and celebrating the spiritual community, and you'd be very welcome to come along to that." So I came along, and I went into this room as a sevenfold puja was starting. So for those of you that are familiar with the puja, you'll know it. For those of you that aren't, it's basically you have one person leading, they say a line, everybody repeats it back. It was a small situation, nothing like this. I first started going along to the Liverpool Buddhist Centre, And I think it was about 10 or 15 people, so it was a much smaller situation. But I went in, there's somebody like me sat there wearing one of these, saying these sort of poetic lines, and then everybody repeating it back. And I had this kind of dual response to it. So my response was, wow, this is really beautiful. Something about it, immediately, I just loved it. I thought, this is so beautiful. I've never heard anything like this before. And then another part of me was just like, this is really weird. At the same time, I had both of those reactions going on. I thought it sounded a bit culty. Like the thing of, it's like that scene in The Life of Brian, isn't it? Where he's saying to them, like, you're all individuals. And they all go, we are all individuals, like that. There's something a bit weird about everybody saying the same thing. Anybody else have that experience? Yeah. So found it very, very beautiful. Also found it very, very strange. But I loved ritual from the start. And I'll say a little bit about why that might be in a moment. But that was my response. And everybody will have a slightly different response to it. So I wanted to tell you, I thought I'd say a little bit about... So there's a context. So I was thinking about this evening, and I was thinking about it over the weekend. So I thought, okay, I know I'm going to lead this class on Monday, and I was thinking about what to say, and I ended up having a conversation about it yesterday with 2 other members of our Buddhist order. So I was away at the weekend with my partner, who's also an ordained Buddhist, and it was kind of a birthday celebration weekend for her. And we were at a friend's place who is also an ordained Buddhist in the Cotswolds. And the friend was singing in a concert on Saturday night. So she's in a choir, and she was singing at a place called the Sheldonian Theatre in Oxford. Has anybody ever been to the Sheldonian Theatre? You have, yes. Could you say what it's like? Yeah.
It's very beautiful. It's very...
Yeah, not old in a shabby way. It's kind of old in a... Yeah. It's very beautiful, isn't it? Like, it's incredibly beautiful. It's one of the... I'd never been to this venue before. And it's like, sometimes when you go somewhere, it's like, I haven't been many times, but I've been to the Royal Opera House a few times. And it's kind of worth going to the Royal Opera House just to go to the Royal Opera House. It's so beautiful. And then you get an opera on top of that, which is lovely. And the Sheldonian Theatre was a bit like that on Saturday. So we went because we were away for my partner's birthday, they're friends, and we were near Oxford, and this friend was singing, she's in the choir. So we went to this concert, and it was the Oxford Philharmonic Orchestra. And it was in this venue it was breathtaking, like so beautiful. Just this amazing historical building with these kind of tiers and a beautiful fresco on the ceiling. And then we listened to Verdi's Requiem, which is the piece that this friend was singing in. So it's a choir. She was one of an 80-piece choir and a massive full orchestra. It's absolutely beautiful. It was breathtaking. And I don't know if anybody knows Verdi's Requiem. It's not my usual thing. I'm more of a kind of punk rock guy usually. I like a Ramones gig or something would be more my thing. But I really, really enjoyed it. And it's particularly poignant. She was telling me about the piece. So it's so Requiem is basically like a funeral mass. And the composer, Giuseppe Verdi, lost his wife and 2 young daughters who were less than 5 years old within the space of 3 years. So his wife and his 2 daughters died within the space of a few years. So very, very, very painful. He decided that he was going to give up music at a certain point, and then he came back to music. And then at some point he wrote this funeral mass. So it's very kind of evocative and very beautiful. And so we went to this concert, and the next day we were sat around on these sofas, and I said, okay, look, I'm leading this evening on Monday on puja. Do you have any thoughts on it? And so we were sat talking about puja and ritual and our relationship to it. But I thought it was quite interesting because we'd been to this event the night before, and that in itself is a ritual, isn't it? When you go to a concert like that, there's a very prescribed way that you behave. Like if I'd have got up and started headbanging in the middle of it or something, that wouldn't have gone down very well. You turn up, you comport yourself in a particular way, you listen, you don't clap at the wrong time, so it's an hour and a half long, and you don't clap when the music stops, you just clap at the end, and you're in a particular state of mind. But the thing is, you're trying to bring a certain level of concentration and awareness to it. So I thought that was interesting. That's a kind of ritual in itself. We think that our lives are sort of, that rituals a bit, I don't know, maybe you don't think this, but I think often what happens these days is we think that we're too sophisticated for ritual these days. We think that we don't really have rituals. We think of ritual as being a sort of hangover from religious past. But there are so many rituals that we engage in our day-to-day life. And they're very much part of our life. And when we engage in ritual, what we're doing is we're marking something. So we're saying, this is important, this is serious. I'm going to bring a certain level of mindfulness to this, or a certain level of awareness to this. I'm going to do this certain thing. So even small rituals like sending somebody like a birthday message or like a birthday cake, Like I remember being with a friend once and them being really upset that nobody had got them a cake for their birthday. These are like small rituals as well, aren't they? But Buddhist ritual is, it's of that ilk. What we're doing is we're saying there is something in life which we are taking seriously, and we want to bring a certain level of awareness to that in order to open our hearts to it and in order to sort of deepen our connection with it. In this case, the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. So it was interesting then, we had this conversation on the Sunday where we each went round, and this is 3 ordained Buddhists that are talking now. So we're all members of the Triratna Buddhist order. And yet it was interesting, each one of us had a slightly different relationship to ritual. So the woman who was singing in the concert on Saturday evening, she said that the first time she was present at Sevenfold Puja, she said, quote, "I wanted to run a mile." So I thought that was interesting. That was her response, was she had a real aversion to it. And then she said she kept coming back and kept engaging with ritual. And then she was present at a Sevenfold Puja during somebody's Mitra ceremony. So for those, some of you will know this, but a Mitra ceremony is when somebody in our community, in our Buddhist community, our tradition, declares themselves publicly to be a Buddhist. And that's a ritual within a ritual. So at the Mitra ceremony, somebody offers a candle, a flower, and some incense to the shrine. And in doing that, they're publicly declaring themselves to be a Buddhist and saying that they want to, at least for now, practice within this Buddhist tradition. And that happens within the context of a broader ritual, which is the Sevenfold Puja, which is what we're looking at in this series. And she said that it was being present at a puja in the context of a Mitra ceremony that brought that to life for her. It almost gave it an extra layer of significance, and she felt the significance of that. She felt the weight of that, and she felt the meaning of that, and that sort of broke something open for her. Now, my partner was saying, and also it's interesting with her because her background is that she was brought up a Catholic, basically, and didn't like it. So she was brought up a Catholic, had to do lots of ritual, didn't like it. So you can imagine then why she wanted to run a mile, when she was probably thinking like, what is this, when she first was in a puja. So then my partner, she was talking about her relationship to puja, and she had a deep mistrust of religion in general. So when I first met my partner, she's now an ordained Buddhist. The first night I met her, I hope it's okay to say this, I'm not naming her. So the first night I met her, when we got together, she said, well, I smoke, I drink, I eat meat, and I'm anti-religion. And I was a Buddhist at this point. So she said, I'm not sure how we're going to get on. Anyway, 20 years later, she's an ordained Buddhist. But she grew up under communism. So she grew up in what's now the Czech Republic, that used to be Czechoslovakia. And as far as she was concerned, religion was just a thing of the past. It was like, why would you do that? It's just not kind of modern. It's not progressive. So her relationship with ritual came from that. And she said it was only through leading ritual herself that she started to really deepen her connection with it and sort of have a real heart connection with it. And as I've said, my reaction to ritual to begin with was that I loved it, and I also thought it was really weird. But I found it very, very beautiful and quite captivating. That's just deepened and deepened and deepened over the years that I've been a Buddhist. I find Buddhist ritual wonderful. I find it very engaging. But I grew up in a spiritual vacuum. So both of my parents were atheists, and I was kind of looking for a spiritual path from a very young age. So I became a Christian when I was in my teens, and I felt like I was sort of looking for an explicitly religious path, not a spiritual path even, or not just a spiritual path. So for me, when I first heard puja, it was very, very attractive. So the reason why I'm saying that is that what I didn't want to do is just sit here and tell you all how much I love puja over an evening, because I want you all to get a sense that whatever your relationship with it is, that's fine. It's totally fine, however you feel about puja. And I'd also encourage you to kind of explore it and to think about what your relationship with it is and why that might be, and your relationship with it also might change as well. So I'm sort of giving you 3 different perspectives there, and those are, I think, fairly typical as well. In the first half, we sort of started looking at puja. We kind of talked about it a little bit generally. And then we did some meditation where we talked about the first 2 verses, and then we were talking about our responses to puja and our relationship to puja. So I'm just going to say a little bit more about puja generally, and then I'm going to just start talking about the first verse about worship. I thought it'd be interesting just to explore that a little bit. And this is a series that is going to carry on over the next 6 weeks after tonight. And in each of the weeks, we're going to be looking at the different verses of the puja and the significance of them and what they mean. So I was talking in the first half about this concert that I went to on Saturday, which in itself is a kind of ritual. You know, there's music, there's words. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to put you in touch with a certain kind of mood, or you could say it's trying to open your heart. The difference, I guess, is, there's lots of difference, isn't there? I mean, one's Christian, for example. I don't want to draw too close a comparison. But what we're trying to do in puja is we are actually participating in it. So it's not something it's not, we say it's in call and response, but I like that because it's not call and repeat. It's actually call and response, which means that you are actually responding, you are participating. And it's something that we're doing with our body, speech and mind. So it's when you first come along to the Buddhist center, there's all sorts of things you learn, like study and meditation and so on. And puja is one where you're engaging your body, maybe you're making offerings, you're saying words, and you're also conjuring up images in your mind as well. So you're trying to engage wholeheartedly with what's actually there in the puja, hopefully, and not just kind of saying the words, basically. And what this made me think of is like, it's a practice of opening our hearts, in a sense. What we're trying to do, ideally, is sort of open ourselves up in a way where we're going beyond this usual sort of sense of kind of being closed off or hard-hearted. Do people know what I'm talking about? Like, I really notice this when I'm on retreat, for example, is I usually don't notice how kind of slightly shut down I've become. And that's a kind of a defense mechanism against, it's a way of navigating our experience. When we live in a very busy city and we've got lots and lots and lots of sort of input all the time, it's actually difficult to stay in a situation and stay in a state where you're kind of receptive and open. I really notice that when I'm on retreat. I usually notice, like, first couple of days when I'm on retreat, I'm quite tired, I nap a lot. And then around about day 3 or 4, there's something that seems to happen. And I know that something seems to happen because the world starts to look slightly different. And the world is exactly the same, in a way, you could say, from the world that, say, for example, if you're at a retreat center, it's the same retreat center as the one that you arrived at a few days before, but you see it differently. It's somehow like things start to become alive, or they start to sparkle a little bit. I really noticed this. Sivana Jyoti was saying that we were co-leading the spring retreat, the winter intensive retreat over Christmas and New Year. And there was on day 3, it started to get very foggy. And sort of day 3, day 4 were very, very foggy. And there's an image of a Buddha figure called Akashamitra that sits on a pond at Vajrasana that some of you will be familiar with. And I noticed this cobweb that was coming down from his ear. It sounds like nothing, but it was so beautiful. It just, there was kind of dew on the cobweb, and it just seemed sort of magical and alive. And my response to that a few days before, I'd walked in the retreat centre, I'd looked at that, and I thought, oh, somebody needs to dust that. They haven't done their job properly. And a few days later, my response was like, gosh, that is so beautiful. And if we were in that kind of state, we would be way, way, way more receptive to the fact that reality is trying to talk to us all the time. So these teachings that we have on impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, all these basic Buddhist teachings, the reason why we're not transformed by those teachings most of the time is that we're not open enough, we're not receptive enough. The problem is not with the teaching, the problem is with us. Now, when I say the problem is with us, that makes it sound like we're doing something wrong. We're not doing something wrong. It's just the way we naturally are. But if the teachings are actually going to make any difference to us, we need to be in a state where we're more receptive. And that's an aesthetic experience. It's not just to do with our mind, and it's not to do with acquiring new facts or knowledge, for example. If it was just a case of me telling you something and you just hearing the right thing, like an instruction manual or something like that, then we wouldn't have a beautiful Buddha image on the shrine. We wouldn't put flowers on the shrine. We wouldn't have candles. We wouldn't try and make this place look beautiful. It would look more like an adult education centre where you just have Formica top tables and I just write on a whiteboard, saying everything is impermanent. And there you go, you've read that. So job done, next step enlightenment, It's not like that. What it is like is that as we get closer to the Buddha, our hearts start to open, and that's an aesthetic experience. And if we can create that aesthetic experience, it's both, if I can explain this, it's both fruit and path. So the fruit is that you experience things as more beautiful, and you will want to create more beauty around you. I think one of the hallmarks of somebody that actually has gone deep into the teachings is that somehow they just seem to create beauty around them. That can be physical beauty. It can also be beauty in the way that they express themselves. It can be beauty in their friendships. So that's the fruit of practice. But it's also beauty as a path. It also takes us closer. And that's what the puja is it's a path of, as I said, it's devotion. It's evoking more and more beautiful mind states so that when we contemplate that, it actually has an effect on us and it takes us closer to it as well. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Yeah? Is anybody not sure? Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay, good. So that's part, you could say that's one of the things that we're trying to do in the puja, is to kind of evoke this beauty in order to open our hearts and in order to engage our emotions. So Sangharakshita talks about this. There's this book that he wrote about ritual called Ritual and Devotion in Buddhism, which I don't think is in print anymore, but it's very good. I think you can pick it up on Amazon quite easily. And so he writes about puja, and he talks about. He says basically that us not being open-hearted enough, or not being in touch with our emotions, or us not bringing our emotions onto the path, is the central problem of the spiritual life. This is what he says. It's as strong as that. He says it's the central problem of the spiritual life, and he talks about us needing to find emotional equivalents to our intellectual understandings. So, we can sit here and we can say, I don't know, that skillful action leads to happiness, or that negative action will lead to unhappiness, or that things are impermanent, or that our ordinary human conditioned mind has unsatisfactoriness in it. We get that on an intellectual level. I don't think we fully understand it, but we get it on an intellectual level. But our hearts often aren't involved. We're not actually fully behind that. Because if we were fully behind it, we would live very, very differently. We wouldn't be living the lives that we're in. If our hearts and minds truly bought into the teachings, then I think we would live differently. But in order to understand that, our hearts need to be moved, because we're not just rational creatures. We are rational creatures, but we're not just rational creatures. What gets us motivated to do something is when we're actually moved to do something, when our heart is in it. That's one way of talking about it. So again, thinking about this concert on Saturday, or, if we think about drama or film or music, we want that, and we kind of need that, I think, don't we? I don't know if any of you have this kind of thing, but there are certain films that I watch, I've watched multiple times, and I know I'm going to cry when I watch them. What would an example be? Lion would be one of them. Has anybody seen the film Lion? Yeah, a few of you have seen that, about this young guy who is estranged from his mum in India as a young boy, and he manages to trace her using Google Maps. There's this moment where he's reunited with his mum, and then at the end of the film, it's based on a real life story, they show the real life person reuniting with his mum. I defy anyone to watch that and not be completely in bits. But why would you do that? It's because we want our hearts to open. We know that actually being sort of closed-hearted is not our best state or our natural state. And the arts can help us do that. Storytelling can help us to do that. There's a piece of music that I absolutely love called Harmonium by John Adams. It's quite a modern American composer. And I partly listen to it because I know that I'll be in tears at the end of it. If I want to sort of break open my heart, that's what I listen to. It's interesting, just this morning, so for my kind of day job, so to speak, I work for a charity that some of you will know about called Karuna. So we fundraise in the UK, and we give money to organisations in India, Nepal and Bangladesh who work with very, very poor, very marginalised communities. And I did a session with our fundraisers this morning. So I'm a programme manager for the charity. I'm just about to go there for a month on Friday. And I'll be spending time with projects in India and Bangladesh. And I was talking to our fundraisers about the work that we fund. That's part of my role, is to communicate back to them what we do and why it's wonderful, and motivate them to fundraise. And, when I do these kind of sessions, I don't sit there and tell them facts and figures. I don't even often talk about the whole scope of the work. What I do is I focus in on one person's story. And then I might tell them about the whole organization, for example. Because we're not moved by facts and figures. We're moved by stories, and we're moved by stories about human beings and human beings changing. So if I want them to feel motivated to go out and fundraise, that's what I'm going to do, basically. So we don't exist only on the level of the rational. Okay, so I thought I'd just say a little bit about just moving on to the first verse of the puja. So there's this first verse, worship. So I'll just read this out. So the words to the verse are, with Mandarava, blue lotus and jasmine, with all flowers pleasing and fragrant, and with garlands skillfully woven, I pay honour to the princes of the sages, so worthy of veneration. I envelop them in clouds of incense, sweet and penetrating. I make them offerings of food, hard and soft, and pleasing kinds of liquids to drink. I offer them lamps encrusted with jewels, festooned with golden lotus. On the paving sprinkled with perfume, I scatter handfuls of beautiful flowers. So in this verse, we're setting the mood for the puja, and the first verse is worship. So essentially what we're doing is we're bowing down to the ideal of the Buddha, and we're setting that as the tone for how we begin the puja, is we are offering flowers and perfume and so on, and we're kind of looking up to an ideal. So I just wondered, to begin with, what I'd like you to do is to get into pairs, and I'd like you to just discuss with your other person, what's your response to that, and what's your response to the idea of worship. So again, I wonder if anyone would just like to share what you were talking about, or any of your responses to like either the verse or particularly just the word, this idea of worship. It's not a word that we use very often these days, is it? Or it's not something that's really kind of in vogue in our culture. It's almost like a bit of a taboo, isn't it? Maybe I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but what's your responses to it? Yeah.
Hi. This might be a bit controversial. I struggle with the word a little.
Yeah.
Because I guess when I think of worship, I think of bowing down.
Yeah.
And I see it as both without logic.
Yeah.
Without any type of thinking, just pure devotion. And I also struggle, I mean, this is amazing, but I struggle with the idea of having the Buddha, who was a human being, up on a different level. And it's almost like we are sort of, when you put him on that altar, it perhaps becomes something unattainable. When in reality, he was a human being, and it was, I think his steps to enlightenment were supposed to be accessible to anyone. So I just find the whole worship side of it, and this goes for all religions. So I think those 2 points mainly. I think it creates a lot of distance between you and the sort of the path. That's just me.
Yeah, no, I don't think that is controversial. Well, I mean, in a sense, maybe it is, but I'm inviting everyone to be honest, and I appreciate your honesty. And it's interesting, that idea, isn't it? Then why would we have the Buddha there when we're saying the Buddha was born in the puja? In threefold puja, we say the Buddha was born as we are born. What the Buddha overcame, we too can overcome. So your response is one that you find that difficult because you feel it creates some distance. So excellent, thank you very much. Yeah, anyone else? Yeah, Rowan.
I think previously I had a similar relationship to it, but more recently, I was doing some study, and Bhante was writing about how the Buddha represents sort of the Buddha that you imagine represents you as an enlightened being, not
Right.
some other
Right.
the historical
Yeah,
Buddha
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah,
whoever
yeah.
per se.
Mm.
And so, I don't know, when I think of worship, I think, oh yeah, sort of in front of me there's these qualities which I value, and which I want to try and move towards, and sort of transform myself towards.
That's a really interesting point, isn't it? So it's like, I think that's very important, is like getting the thing that it's actually you, the path is you transforming. So it's it's like the Buddha's showing you the way, but he can't do it for you. And it's you actually taking responsibility for your own growth and change towards this. So I think that's interesting, isn't it? When we talk about bowing, that you're not giving up personal responsibility. Actually, what you're trying to do is take more responsibility, but in the direction of what the Buddha taught. But the Buddha was very, very clear that you shouldn't just take on board what he says unquestioningly. So you need to examine it for yourself in your own experience. But there's something more important there, which is he's not just saying that because he's sort of saying, oh, look, it's fine, if you disagree with me, that's okay. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is, you have to understand this for yourself. That's the thing. It's not, I can't do this for you. So you will have to incorporate this into the mind that you have in some way. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? It's not like just, you follow these steps and X, Y, Z. The teaching will meet your unique mind and your conditioning. So each of us is this very unique set of conditions and experiences. And we have to all figure out one way or another how the teachings meet our particular situation, our history, our tendencies, all of that sort of thing. And the path is you changing. And that will look different from person to person. Yes, go on.
I was going to really resonate when you were talking about the difference between knowing something intellectually versus your heart being in it.
Yeah.
And almost what you just said, to me, it's like you have to have it contextually with your experiences for it to go into your heart. Otherwise, it is just an intellectual idea.
That's right. And I think that's what let's say what film or drama can do for us, isn't it? Is it can reflect your experience back to you and help you understand something about yourself. Do you know what I mean? So that's why different people are attracted to different art forms. And, that's why different things will speak to different people in different ways. That film that I mentioned might not speak to all of you. For me, it really has a strong effect on me. And that's why we have classes at the Buddhist Center, and that's why we have lots of different people teaching, is I can tell you my experience, and I can hope that me sharing my experience with you is in some way helpful in helping you to make your own changes and for you to grow. But, so you have the teaching, but you also have to somehow try and bring that down to a level where it's actually how that works out in someone's life. So I can say how it's worked out in my life, but you then also have to work out how it's going to work out in your life and what you particularly need to do and what you might need to think of. And that's going to be very different from one person to another. I've slightly gone off on a tangent there, but I think it's an important point. So, yeah, go on.
I think another part of it too, in terms of worship, but it's worthwhile revisiting your relationship to words. Because worship in the West is different from worship in the East.
Right. Yeah.
Where in the West it's more along the lines of doing everything that your superior tells you, and so you're worshiping your superior knows everything, and you have to follow it along.
Right.
Whereas in Eastern religions, it's more along the lines of this person knows everything.
Yeah.
Knows everything, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be questioned.
Right. Yeah.
And it's kind of like when I was studying martial arts, one of the things that we really like to do is if a head teacher is sparring with him, you always try and put in a cheeky shot and try and hurt him, in which case you get hurt even more. But but by doing that, you're recognizing that although this person has all this experience and knowledge, they're still and it's still worth trying to break.
That's interesting, isn't it? I think that connotation is quite an interesting one. So we might have quite unhelpful connotations of the idea of worship because it means something that you just don't question or that you surrender your will to. And that's not what we're talking about in a Buddhist context. And it's not... so the position of a friend or a teacher, certainly in our tradition anyway, also is different from that. Like, I'm very happy for you to criticize me, or for us to have an argument about something, and it's not. I'm not sat here kind of like giving the teaching or giving a lecture. I'm just trying to share my experience with you, and I'm meeting up with people all the time where we're sharing our lives, and it's like, well, what's it like for you? And this is how it is for me at the moment, and so it's very, very different in that regard, I think, and that's a good point that you raise. Yeah. So what about this word worship then? So it's not fashionable, probably because of these kind of connotations. Do we worship? I mean, say for example, in a modern London urban people like us, do we worship? Do we worship? Yes.
I often think when I'm at Glastonbury that we are all worshipping the pyramid stage in a really intense, creative way.
Yeah, that's right.
It's the closest thing I have to that.
Yeah, that's right. So we do worship. We worship the pyramid stage at Glastonbury. What else do we worship? Or what do, not necessarily you, but what do people in our culture worship? Yeah, go on.
Money in the financial centre of London, in the city.
Yeah, money's a massive one, isn't it? We live near like a centre of worship, don't we, for money? The Square Mile and Canary Wharf and all of that. The god there, the guru, is money, isn't it? Is like making money at any price, basically. And being prepared to do all sorts of things in order to make money. What else do we worship, or what else is worshipped? Celebrity. Yeah. It's almost like celebrities are sort of like the new gods, aren't they? It's funny, like I don't have a TV, so the only time I watch TV is when I stay with my mum sometimes, and I go and visit her. She lives in South Wales, and she's quite old, so she that's mostly what she does in the evening is watch TV. And whenever I speak to her on the phone, she'll say the name of some random celebrity, like, oh, love, what do you think about Dexter Johnson then? And I'm like, I don't know, Mum, I don't know who he is. She's like, well, he should never have got married to that young woman. And, but it's like we sort of need something to project. It's almost like we need something to project onto, don't we? So, you see these magazines like Celebrity Gossip or whatever it is, and people buy these things that are just like, this person went shopping the other day, or this person's now like wearing a black dress, or whatever it is. Like, it's like, the question is, why should we care? But we care because I think in a sense we want to look up, we want to revere, we want to worship something. But what's happened is, in our culture, is like we've broken from our traditional, and I guess where we are at one time would have been a sort of Christian faith. So we can't trust that anymore. That's what we feel. We've been kind of, either it just seems irrelevant, or we've been let down, or whatever it is. And we somehow, we can't do that anymore, but we need to do something. So we look up to like celebrities, for example. What else would be an example of that? I was thinking about like property would be one thing as well. It's like we completely fetishize property, don't we? Like if you look at a branch of Foxtons, it looks like they look like Harrods or something, don't they? Like, I'm of a generation where I remember estate agents in the 1970s were just like these kind of grimy offices, and they'd be like, "Oh, do you want to buy a house? Well, there's one. There you go, have it." You know. Whereas now estate agents are like, they're like these palaces, aren't they? You know, and there's so much, people get so fixated with property. You know, it's become like, they've become our sort of sacred buildings, haven't they? iPhones, another one, phones, I was thinking of this, and I was thinking, like, if you could, the image that came to mind was of an alien, like, coming down to Earth and saying, well, what do these people worship? They would imagine that we worship our phones, basically, wouldn't they? Because everywhere you look, people are like, they're all sort of like, oh, you know, and they're these things that shine, and we're like, oh, you know, and, you know, like parents looking at them all the time when they're with their kids. So their kids look up and they think, what is this incredibly special thing that I can't wait to have? And everybody's queuing outside of the Apple shop for like the next iPhone. You know, like literally people queuing at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning to get a new phone. I mean, I remember when iPhone X came out, you know, and this, you know, people were queuing outside at 4 o'clock in the morning, and the slogan was, "This changes everything." And it's like, it changes nothing. Like, it changes absolutely nothing. But we're somehow like, it's like we want to worship, we haven't got anything worthy to sort of focus that reverence and that natural inclination. We have to look up. We know there's something more. We know this can't be it. Our ordinary limited human consciousness, you know, our disappointment, our frustrations, we know there must be something more to life than that, but we can't figure out what it is. So we put it into these things that cannot actually satisfy us. So we go round and round and round in circles, making more disappointment and frustration for ourselves, because we can't find something that actually will not let us down. I'll just give you one more example. So one thing I was thinking about with this is, if you worship something, there will be some kind of myth or some kind of belief behind that. So, for example, with property, you're not just worshipping a house. There's a belief that somehow this will kind of keep you safe. If you have this, it will protect you against all sorts of other things. Or like your phone, that somehow it'll give you something. It'll give you status, or it'll give you, I don't know, some kind of different mind or something like that. You know, if you have money, it's not actually money that you worship. It's the things that you think that will bring you, like security, a better life, all that sort of thing. So it's like there's a myth that goes with everything that we believe and everything that we worship. And I was thinking about this, and I was remembering when I was young. So I had an experience the other day where I watched something, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But when I was 17, I had a moment, I had an evening that really changed my life, which was when I was a young lad. I grew up in a small town in the north of England, which was, I think, officially, possibly, the most boring place in the world to grow up. I won't say where it was. But anyway, it was a small town in the north of England, and it was so boring. And I just felt like I'd been born into the wrong life. I couldn't believe that my life was as boring as it was, and that I was living in this boring place with these boring people and this boring family. And all I wanted was excitement. And I just wanted like excitement and sort of chaos and transcendence and kind of like, And so the way I found that was primarily through music and also kind of drink and drugs. So I used to drink a lot, used to take a lot of drugs. And I went to a concert when I was 17. And has anybody heard of a band called Jane's Addiction? Yay, okay, great. So I went to see them. I was a big fan of theirs, and I went to see them. This was before they were famous. I went to see them in this tiny venue in 1990. not to make you jealous or anything.
No.
So this was 1990. I was 17, and I went to see this band. And the singer, it was still the best gig I've ever been to. Like, the singer came on stage, absolutely beautiful when he was younger. He exuded this kind of erotic energy. And like, I'm a heterosexual male, but there was so much eros in that room. It was unbelievable. Came on stage, kind of dreadlocks to about here, came on stage in a red leather catsuit, and was just the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I was like, oh my God. And they played this incredible set for, it was like 2 hours or something like that. My 17-year-old mind was absolutely blown. Like, it was the most incredible evening. I'd never seen anything like it. I was converted, basically. So that myth, for me, was like the rock and roll myth, which was like, if you drink a lot and take a lot of drugs and do crazy things and wear a red leather catsuit, then your life is going to be really, really interesting. And I subscribed to that myth for quite a long time, not the catsuit bit. Got to my late 20s and realised that myth was actually pretty hollow, and that it doesn't really lead anywhere. In fact, it kind of leads you around in circles, and in fact, it can actually be quite harmful and quite sort of dangerous. That's a whole other story, which I won't go into. But a few days ago, I watched a video of this band of Reformed, and they've gone back on tour. And it was pitiful. It was absolutely pitiful. This guy now, who's not much older than me, it just looked awful. It just looked like a load of middle-aged guys trying to cash in on what they once were. And it was really like, oh, God. So I think it's interesting thinking about if you believe in something, if you buy into a particular myth, where does it lead? Where does it take you? Because that's what I believed in, and that's where that ended up. I let go of that a long time ago. But I think it's thinking about where does that reverence go? And there are very few places where that reverence can go where it doesn't actually end up just coming back on itself or leading you round in circles. Anyway, there's somebody who can say this much better than I can. So I've got a quote that I want to read you from a guy called David Foster Wallace. And so I'm just going to read this because he says it much better than I can. So it's quite a long quote, so if you want to, you can just relax. Maybe you can close your eyes if you want to. So he says, in the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. An outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it Christ or Allah or Yahweh or the Wiccan Mother Goddess or the Four Noble Truths or some infrangible set of ethical principles, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough. Never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. On one level, we all know this stuff already. It's been codified as myths, proverbs, cliches, bromides, epigrams, parables, the skeleton of every great story. The trick is keeping the truth up front in daily consciousness. Worship power, you will feel weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. The insidious thing about these forms of worship is not that they're evil or sinful, it's that they are unconscious. They are default settings. They're the kind of worship you gradually slip into day after day, getting more and more selective about what you see and how you measure value without ever fully being aware that that's what you're doing. And the world will not discourage you from operating on your default settings, because the world of men and money and power hums along quite nicely on the fuel of fear and contempt and frustration and craving and the worship of self. Our own present culture has harnessed these forces in ways that have yielded extraordinary wealth and comfort and personal freedom. The freedom to be lords of our own tiny skull-sized kingdoms alone at the centre of all creation. This kind of freedom has much to recommend it, but of course there are all different kinds of freedom, and the freedom that is most precious you will not hear much talked about in the great outside world of winning and achieving and displaying. The really important kind of freedom involves attention, awareness, and discipline, and effort, and being able to truly care about other people and to sacrifice for them over and over in myriad petty little unsexy ways every day. That is real freedom. The alternative is unconsciousness, the default setting, the rat race, the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing.